The following program contains adult material and strong language.
Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
The afternoon on January 10th at approximately 1:30 p.m., 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson enters his gym in his high school. The high school has two gyms, one newly built and another that had served the school for many years. This old gymnasium was still partially in use, but it had mostly served as storage for various school sporting equipment, including a number of wrestling mats. These mats were quite large, and when rolled up, measured 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide. Over the holiday break that students were returning from, several additional mats were added to the storage area. These wrestling mats had been stored in the old gym, and it's reported that several kids in the school had used the empty space inside the mats as a sort of makeshift locker in order to avoid having to pay fees to have their own permanent locker at the school. At 1:30 p.m., Kendrick is seen entering the old gymnasium via security footage. This is the final footage of Johnson to ever be recorded. The following 3 minutes of footage show no one else entering the gymnasium other than Johnson. It's been reported that Kendrick and another student had been sharing the same pair of shoes, possibly sports related, and that they would store them inside the opening of one of the wrestling mats inside the old gym. On the day in question, it seems that the mat that Kendrick and his friend had used to store their shoes was now blocked by the addition of several new wrestling mats that had been added to the pile over the holiday break. Following this image, Kendrick was marked absent from his next class on the day's schedule. Following the end of the school day, Kendrick was supposed to attend a freshman basketball game that would have concluded by early evening. When Kendrick did not return home, his mother reported him missing at around midnight. The following morning, Kendrick's mother went to the school and informed them that her son was missing. The school assisted her in looking for Kendrick and helped print out flyers about her son that could be passed around the school and local community. At around 10:30 that morning, a number of students who had entered the old gymnasium were filling out some paperwork while sitting on some of those wrestling mats that had been stored there. During this time, one of the students notices a pair of socks sticking out from the top of one of the mats that had been laying vertically. The student, finding this odd, or potentially thinking it might be some sort of prank, climbed the bleachers in order to look inside the mat. To their horror, they saw a body wedged into the mat. With the help of a teacher, the students tipped over that wrestling mat and attempted to pull out whoever was inside, not aware that Kendrick had now been in that inverted position for over 20 hours. The students quickly stopped trying to excise Kendrick after they noticed blood, vomit, and the distinct smell of decomposition when they tried to free him. An investigation was quickly launched, and every single student that was seen entering the gym that day and the day prior was interviewed by police. Investigators found no connection between any student they interviewed and Kendrick Johnson. The only blood found at the scene was inside the rolled-up mat above his waist, suggesting it came from Kendrick while inverted and after his death. Police eventually determined that the death was accidental. For their part, the Johnson family would continue to seek justice as they felt Kendrick had been murdered. But after 2 additional independent investigations came to the same conclusion as the initial police investigation, and after the family named 2 other boys without any evidence, as well as the family being exposed for both lying to the media and using a post-mortem photo of Kendrick at their rallies, claiming that it was how he looked when he was found, no more investigations were launched. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Bud Holland, age 46, is in command of the B-52 Stratofortress known as ZAR-52, with a 4-man crew. It's a routine flight in preparation for an air show that's taking place the following day. On board the aircraft is also one Colonel Robert Wolfe, acting as the aircraft safety observer, and the flight is serving as his last before retiring. It's an important day for Wolfe, as it's tradition for a retiring airman to be met by friends, family, and colleagues post-flight for a celebration. That day on the ground were Colonel Wolfe's wife, alongside a number of his friends, watching that practice flight, as well as preparing for a post-flight ceremony. At 1:58 p.m., ZAR-52 takes off from the runway. A KC-135 Stratotanker also takes off to join ZAR-52 for practice maneuvers. Everything goes according to plan, and each aircraft shows off some impressive maneuvers that will no doubt impress the crowd during the air show the following day. The KC-135 completes their practice and returns to base first, landing at 2:16 p.m. Following this, ZAR-52 then makes their approach to perform a touch-and-go maneuver on the runway, but they are instructed by the tower to perform a go-around first as a precaution, as the KC-135 is still on the runway. Colonel Holland acknowledges the tower's instructions and requests clearance to perform a 360-degree turn to the left. The tower gives their approval, and Colonel Holland begins his turn. At the same time this is happening, a photographer on the ground captures this photo of ZAR-52, the final photo of the aircraft and its crew, before impacting into the ground. In the photo, you can see the ejection hatch of one Colonel McGeehan, his seat on the upper deck, who seems to have attempted to eject prior to the crash. ZAR-52 had stalled during its 360-degree turn. It seems that Colonel Holland increased power to the engines in order to perform the maneuver, but had done so far too late to maintain the airspeed of the aircraft. You see, the B-52 Stratofortress is a very large aircraft, and its engines can take up to 8 seconds to respond to throttle commands. Because of this, ZAR-52 saw its airspeed decrease from 182 knots at the beginning of the turn to 145 knots 8 seconds before impacting the ground. During this lack of power, the aircraft banked to an angle beyond 60 degrees. The crew attempted to make corrections by applying full right spoiler, rudder, and nose-up elevator just prior to impact, and just after noticing the stall. But because of the lack of power and the time it took for the plane to respond, there was nothing that could be done, and the aircraft entered what is known as an accelerated stall.
Stalled.
This happened because at the 60-degree bank angle, they were at the stall speed of the aircraft. which was then 147 knots, 2 knots faster than the 145 they were going. Couple this with the low angle of the banking turn, and the crew had no time or space to recover from the stall, something they may have been able to do at the aircraft's cruising altitude. After the crash, an investigation found that Colonel Holland was known as an aggressive pilot who often broke aircraft and safety rules, including previously exceeding bank angle limitations on an aircraft. On one occasion, Colonel Holland's co-pilot was even forced to take over controls of an aircraft in order to prevent Colonel Holland from crashing into a ridge after buzzing a film crew who were filming the aircraft in question. It's reported that Colonel Holland cleared one ridgeline by only 30 feet after buzzing the ground crew who were forced to take cover for their own safety in order to avoid being injured. Other crew on board that aircraft were screaming at Colonel Holland to climb during this event. It was noted that Colonel Holland was laughing and cursing at the crew the entire time. Lieutenant Colonel Mark McGeehan, whose ejection canopy can be seen activating in the photo of ZAR 52, reported Colonel Holland during the filming incident and wanted to see him removed from flight duty. Now, Colonel Holland was orally reprimanded, but he was not removed from active duty. In fact, that reprimand was not even documented, and neither was the incident, and no higher up within the Air Force was made aware of the situation. After this lack of punishment, Lieutenant Colonel McGeehan made the choice to be co-pilot on any other flight that would see Colonel Holland in command in order to protect his crew and not place other members of his crew at risk. It was because of that honorable choice that Lieutenant Colonel McGeehan was on board ZAR 52, giving his life as he did not want any other person to sit co-pilot with Colonel Holland. This act cost him his life, something he was very well aware of because of Holland's reckless nature. In 1995, Colonel Pellerin pled guilty of dereliction of duty at a court-martial. He was the officer who gave Colonel Holland an oral reprimand during the film crew incident, and was also on board ZAR 52 on the practice flight just prior to the one in the crash. During that specific practice flight, Colonel Holland exceeded bank angles that he was ordered not to exceed during the day's mission briefing. Another colonel even witnessed these violations, but took no action. Now, Colonel Pellerin on board the flight told that colonel that the flight looked good and was safe and well within mission parameters. Colonel Pellerin was not on the following practice flight that led to the crash of ZAR 52, and was replaced last minute by Colonel Wolfe, a flight that would serve as his retirement flight. For his part, Colonel Pellerin was sentenced to forfeit $1,500 from his salary every month for the following 5 months, as well as receiving a written reprimand. A reprimand that could have saved 4 lives if he himself had issued one to Colonel Holland when he had the chance. July 19th, 1991. 12-year-old Jared Negretti was on an overnight Boy Scouts trip to the San Bernardino Mountains. Jared was part of a 6-man group led by Scoutmaster Dennis Knight into the mountains. Now, during this hike, Jared began to lag behind the others on their approach to the summit. Scoutmaster Knight was aware of this fact and allowed Jared to lag behind the other students. This would not be uncommon for hikes, as every child is different and aren't trained or experienced in long hikes. In these situations, what is known as the two-deep leadership method is used in order to help mitigate issues. This policy requires any more intensive hike and overnight trip to have 2 adults overseeing the group. This makes it so if a child or several children lag behind, one adult can be with them to help and provide support. It also makes it so there are always eyes on children, and so no one gets lost, especially during night excursions. During the hike, Scoutmaster Knight was the only adult during that hike. Now Jared began to lag farther and farther behind the group, and at around 6 p.m. it's believed that he was told to sit and wait for them to finish the ascent about another 1,000 feet from the summit, and that they would pick him up on the way down. It's reported that a separate group of hikers noticed Jared and notified Scoutmaster Knight when they reached the summit. That group stated that they saw Jared trying to shortcut the numerous switchbacks on the way down the trail. They told Jared to stay on the trail, but it's unclear why they did not assist Jared, considering his age and lack of other hikers nearby. When Scoutmaster Knight was made aware of Jared lagging behind by the other hiking group, he stated that he would pick Jared up on the way down the mountain. So when the other scouts began their descent down the mountain, looking to meet back up with Jared, he was nowhere to be found. The group, not being able to locate Jared, returned to base camp and then hiked around 5 miles in the dark in order to get help. Sheriff's deputies, including search and rescue teams, rushed to the area, some coming as far away as the Sierra Madre region. It was quickly determined that they would be searching a 130 square mile area of the San Bernardino wilderness. After 3 days of searching, the search area was reduced and refined into a 6 square mile area when a footprint thought to belong to Jared was discovered. Searchers would quickly then discover beef jerky and empty candy wrappers that Jared was carrying on his person during this search. Nearby these items, Jared's camera was also found. On the roll of film were 12 photos that Jared had taken during the trip. The final photo on that camera roll was one of Jared and is the last known photo of the boy. It was a close-up of his eyes and his nose, and it looks as if Jared was taking a photo of himself for some unknown reason. Now perhaps it was an accident, or maybe it was Jared trying to leave some record of himself for those that might eventually come across his camera. Over the next several weeks, over 3,000 people would take part in the search, logging over 45,000 hours and exploring over 50 square miles. Officers were airlifted into various locations, horseback teams were used, and helicopters equipped with infrared cameras were also deployed. But Jared would never be seen again, and his remains have yet to be discovered. Several theories about Jared's disappearance, including him being abducted on the trail, exist, but no evidence of foul play has ever been found. Now it's possible that an animal attacked Jared, but no blood or drag marks were seen near any of Jared's equipment or items that were discovered. The best theory we have goes back to those switchbacks that Jared was apparently seen cutting down the trail through in order to descend quicker. One member of the search team suggests that Jared would have continued to cut down those switchbacks in order to get back to base camp. And during this, Jared would eventually run out of switchbacks and would lose sight of the main trail. Now at this point, Jared would have gone too low and would have been under the main trail without even realizing it. Under the trail was a stream that was surrounded by several cliffs and assorted waterfalls and wild overgrown bush, making working his way back up difficult and making the search for him equally as difficult. It was reported that temperatures during this time were warm enough for Jared to survive on his own in those mountains for at least several days. And as stated, there was water in the area that he could have used, and he did have a bottle on him. But other than that, no additional clues were ever discovered. And in the 30+ years since his disappearance, no trace of Jared has ever been found.